What's up, guys, and thanks for tuning in to CRÜZR Radio, episode number 46. Let's get into it. Joined in today by Dr. Bradley Cohen. We appreciate you joining in with us today, man.
I appreciate you having me.
It's not too far of a drive for you, hopefully.
It was about a 10-minute walk or a 2-minute drive with that rain.
Yeah, it's a good day to be a duck, is what I said earlier.
For sure.
So, why don't you introduce yourself? Just let everybody know who you are.
I'm Brad Cohen. I'm a professor of wildlife ecology over at Tennessee Tech University. My lab does a lot of research on population and habitat management of wildlife, mainly game animals. So turkeys, deer, ducks.
Yeah.
Even grouse, things like that.
Well, is wildlife always been something that you've gravitated towards, or is this just where you found yourself?
Well, I grew up in New York. I grew up in like suburbia, about 2 hours outside of New York City on Long Island. But my dad always fished, always hunted. And hunting's always just been a big part of my life. And so when I went to college, I literally went to the college that was in upstate New York where I went deer hunting.
Yeah.
It was like a 5-minute drive. And so I went to that college, and then I just Googled white-tailed deer into Google Scholar and emailed the professor that came up and did deer research at the University of Georgia for the next 6 years or so. And then after I got my PhD, stayed around UGA doing turkey work. And when you talk about wildlife and for hunters, everyone knows this, it's part of who you are.
Sure.
It's like, explain why you hunt. It's like, well, do you have a couple hours to sit down and
sure.
who I am? And that's basically, it's always been part of my passion.
Yeah.
And it makes being in this type of field real easy.
Oh, I'm sure. And that's part of why we can say we love hunting so much, just because, we drove to the outdoors.
Yeah, well, when I didn't know what I was getting into when I was like, I originally was like, okay, I'm going to go get a master's degree in wildlife biology. I don't know what that means, but, I had a general biology degree from my undergrad. And I was like, all right, I like deer. I'll study them. Well, then the first day I was at the University of Georgia, I realized, like, if I'm going to be a biologist, I'll be working at a check station opening day. And that'll be the day I quit. So I was like, all right, I guess I'm going for a PhD too. And the rest is history. It's always fun to wake up and be like, what type of questions can we ask? What type of questions can we answer? And how can we, answer questions that best address what state agencies need, what hunters need, what people on the landscape need. So
based upon your studies, do you think that's improved you as a hunter?
Man, so yeah. Yeah, I'm still a crappy hunter, but I think it does. I did my my master's degree on deer vision. So I actually had a degree in biology and psychology, and I went to the University of Georgia. They had a little bit of extra money, and they brought me on, and they were like, hey, we have money. It has to be something about deer vehicle collisions. And long story short, I made it about deer vision and understanding what colors deer can see. Then that subsequently was about their acuity. So how well do they blend colors? And so that instantly made me a better hunter, because now I understand. I make my own camo patterns. Really? Oh yeah. So I understand how deer see, and it makes me be able to move a little bit more in the stand, things like that. All right. Then understanding, put GPS collars on deer, and all of a sudden, where they go. It makes you a little bit better. Turkeys, I'm a terrible turkey hunter. Even we've tracked hundreds and hundreds of them. Still terrible at that. And ducks, I'm a very impatient person, and so I'm constantly chasing the ducks wherever they're landing, and that makes me a terrible duck hunter too. So, whatever. Yeah, but all in all, I'll tell you what it's done. It's made me sit in the woods, and I'm constantly asking questions. And for someone like me, that's fulfilling. It just constantly is like, well, we can answer that. We can answer that. Yeah, it all pays off.
Yeah.
Heck yeah.
So what brought you to Cookeville?
So I was at the University of Georgia. I was an assistant research scientist, which means you're on soft money. That's another way of saying the university pays 25% of my salary, and then I have to go do research and have the agencies pay the other 75%.
Yeah.
And that's great, and then I had a kid.
Yeah.
And
right.
She's 4 weeks old, and I'm like, I can't worry about bringing home a paycheck. I need to.
Sure.
And so there was a job open in Tennessee Tech. We have a really strong wildlife program, and I knew that was a state that I could live in an area I could live in. And I had connections with TWRA, which meant I could at least start talking to them about the type of research they want to do. And so basically, just for financial security, I went to Tennessee Tech, and the rest has been great. Like really strong wildlife program, really great connection with TWRA that we built. It's a great decision.
So not only do you do stuff for the agencies as well, but do you teach wildlife biology too?
Yeah, so we have, that's a good question. We have a undergraduate program in wildlife, and we graduate probably, about 70 or so students a year out of it, give or take, maybe up to 100. And I teach habitat management. So that's all about, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it for different wildlife populations? I teach wild bird ecology, which is exactly like it sounds.
Yeah.
And then I'll teach a graduate level class about landscape ecology. So how do we manage at a bigger scale for different population goals or objectives? So those 3 classes are all I teach. And then otherwise I just do a lot of research, mentor a lot of graduate students, have postdocs, all that stuff,
Yeah. So like, if you're going to start like some new kind of research, what does that involve? Going out and studying, I'm sure. And
it's so, a lot of it is the relationships you build. So what I'll do is, I see myself as a facilitator to answer the types of questions that the state agency, federal agencies have, NGOs have, we as hunters have, right? Because oftentimes that's one and the same.
Yeah.
And so I'll build a relationship with, let's say, the turkey biologist, Roger Shields from TWRA, and him and I will be professional colleagues and friends. And as time goes on, he might have a research question that needs answering, and him and I will work together to kind of scope out the project. So most of the stuff isn't me coming to him and being like, hey, you need to research this. It's them coming to me and saying, we have a question. What's the best way of answering it? Here's how, here's the piece we're missing from the puzzle.
Yeah.
Can you address it? And so then I don't need to do a lot of background work. I'm pretty familiar with a lot of the things that we're working on.
Yeah.
It's all about, okay, how can the reason these questions haven't been answered is they're more innovative. They're technology driven. I think they're more at the cutting edge. And so what we have to do is assemble a team that can actually answer that, because him and I alone probably can't do it. Right. Yeah. And so it's all about team building then.
Yeah. So there's a lot that goes into it. And by the time it actually gets to you, it's like a very specific problem that they're trying to figure out.
People don't realize like the amount of time and effort that goes into even developing a research question, even on TWRA's side. So when you're thinking about TWRA has a specific question, well, that question has to be vetted through, several levels. Like Roger Shields again, like, okay, let's talk turkeys. We want to know what's good brooding habitat. I'm going to make something up. Well, we got to go through the assistant chief of wildlife, the chief of wildlife. Then we got to go through the, assistant deputy director, and
you got to run it up the ladder.
And so, okay, it's already been vetted 7 times, and now we've crafted the actual question, and then I'm working kind of tangentially with them at this time, and then we got to work together on a proposal, and then that's got to be vetted, and so by the time a question is set and the research is going, there are very clear deliverables that the state needs or the federal agency needs, because it's very specific to the management that they're doing.
Yeah.
And then my job is to get a student and be like, all right, we got to give them these deliverables. Some of those are not exciting deliverables. They're numbers. They're, give us survival. Well, okay, I'll give you the numbers, right? But now I have to make that be part of a dissertation or a thesis, something that's going to excite the student. And so we work to leverage the project itself and maybe make a little bit more sciencey, ecological, theoretical stuff on the side, all while giving those management decisions. And I think that's where we blend really well, is we kind of can use our understanding of ecology, our understanding of wildlife ecology specifically, and then we can put it to application.
Yeah. Do you keep your stuff more local, or do you try to do like nationwide?
That's a good question. We work with partners up and down and across the United States. Logistically, it's a lot easier when you're doing work in at least Tennessee, Kentucky,
the Southeast.
The Southeast, let's just say. It isn't. We're going to hopefully be starting a project here soon, maybe in like Oklahoma or something like that. And I'm looking forward to it. Like it's exciting. Those type of, doing those type of questions, new areas, new questions. I don't know what the logistic headache of running a project a big project out in a different part, where you can't just drive, you got to fly, But in the end of all things, I'm also most in tune with the Southeast. I'm also most affected by the types of questions we answer in the Southeast. And, there's a passion behind that drives it.
I'm sure. What are some of the projects that you got going on right now?
So some of the projects we have going on right now, some of the biggest projects we have multiple turkey studies going on. The biggest one being in Kentucky. We are doing like a wild turkey ecology project, just looking at nesting, chronology, just the reproductive ecology and brood habitat in particular of what's limiting turkey populations. Second part is we're doing a banding study in Tennessee and Kentucky, looking at harvest rates of male wild turkeys across both states. The next project we're doing is we just finished up and are in the process of publishing one with looking at wood duck harvest and banding goals for wood ducks. So that's a federal project. One of our ongoing projects is a live GPS telemetry work with mallards and gadwall, where we tag a host of different waterfowl species, put little backpacks on them, and watch where they go up and down the flyway, but also in particular to the wintering areas, and understanding the role of different land features like waterfowl refuges or sanctuary, how ducks relate to that. We're in another part of our study is actually adding private land rest areas, so rest areas that ducks can kind of hang out at and not get shot, but aren't part of the state allotment, and see how that redistributes waterfowl and changes their movement.
So you got a lot going on.
Yeah. So like the other one, the big one that we have going on is, you're in Tennessee. We just changed, TWRA just changed their harvest regulations for deer and turkey. Our lab worked with TWRA to do all the science that informed that decision-making process.
That was going to be a question of mine. Does all this probably affects the lawmaking?
That's the whole point. There's no point in doing this. I think that's why I do these outreach as much as possible. We run a Facebook that, has a bunch of people on it and Instagram, whatever. But the whole idea is to get people bought into the science so that they understand why the decisions that the lawmakers are making, state agencies making, why they're making them. Yeah. Because there's no point in just doing the science, right?
Yeah, it's just not off the cuff.
And we want to make sure that we connect the two processes because, we're constantly talking to TWRA or whoever, the commissioners or biologists that need to understand this. But also we want to make sure that the stakeholders themselves, the constituents themselves understand the science that's going on. Yeah, it's all process dependent. Inform something. It's not science just for the sake of science.
Yeah. So going back to the turkeys, what do the numbers look like this year compared to other years?
Yeah, so, all right. So here's something to think about with turkeys. Most of what are shot in any year are 2-year-old birds, right? And so...
Oh, really?
Yes. So like our harvest rates, this was done by Abby Riggs, my master's student, our harvest rates on our 2-year-olds is like 50%.
Whew.
And then it drops more than half to about like, a 3-year-old bird has only got about a 20% harvest rate,
Really?
And then a jake barely gets harvest for what it's worth, like 8 or nobody shoots jakes. That's why like any law that's about like restricting jake harvest is useless because you're not actually affecting harvest. Nobody kills them.
Yeah.
All right. So the turkey population, if you look, we have hit several good years in the previous couple of years of good brood success, good reproduction, good recruitment. In central Tennessee, out from Cookeville, let's say towards Nashville, up into Kentucky, we had the cicada hatch. In our Kentucky project, we had 153% increase in our recruitment.
Holy cow.
So like
I totally forgot about the cicadas though.
So it made a huge difference. Like we had 250% increase in re-nesting. There was huge metrics in reproductive behavior that suggest that those cicadas, and there's another cicada hatch coming next year. And
they help.
I think they make a huge difference. Like I think it's really important. Now,
It's like a buffet laying.
Well, it's a buffet. Ground. It's a buffet for them. You think about what they're trying to do, right? They're constantly trying to, a female hen, she's going to lose her nest 80% of the time, 70% of the time, she's going to lose her nest. So the whole goal is, can we get them to re-nest? It's just by the numbers, right? Mm-hmm. And if she's got all the food she can ever have right next to her while she's nesting, just regaining those resources, cicadas are great. Also, they're saturating the bellies of every single predator too. Like every raccoon's stuffed full of cicadas.
So they're not hunting turkey eggs.
So what are they going to, I'll ignore that. Why would I go for a turkey nest right now when I literally have a buffet of bugs in front of me too?
Yeah. I didn't even think about that.
So I think it matters. So this year should be a better year.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're in a good trajectory for turkey populations. Obviously, it varies regionally.
Yeah.
Around here, it seems pretty good.
I think it's going to be good. I think 2 years from now, it's going to be great. And 3 years from now, it's going to be fantastic.
Awesome.
But, I think there's a lot to learn from those type of population cycles. A lot of people, when we start these projects, they go, no state agency cares that turkey populations are declining. They don't give a crud. Look,
Sure they do.
well, everyone cares. And all these research projects, like, oh, what's your, but the whole point of doing these research projects is trying to explain stuff. But in the end, a lot of these fluctuations that we see over time are kind of going to just be cyclical.
Right.
Does that make sense? Now, there are large landscape changes. Like, I worry a lot about turkeys and the lack of brood habitat. I keep coming back to that in my head because it's something that I think about all the time. Like, I think of being something the size of a quail, more or less, right? And there's no quail around either. That's because
none.
Well, that's because there's no habitat for a small bird that runs on the ground, and that's all a baby turkey is. They might hatch, be about the size of your thumb, and every 2 days or so, or 2 to 3 days, they double their weight until they're about pheasant sized.
Oh my goodness.
And so when you're that small and you're running around, well, that means Bermuda grass or fescue is like a wall. You can't run across it. If you're out in the open, you're a tasty chicken nugget. And so, like, how many times have you been somewhere where you can run on the ground if you're something about the size of your fist and also be covered? There ain't much of it.
Much of it anywhere.
And so, yeah, I think about, like, long-term trends on productivity are concerning in that respect. But in any given year, we're going to see good fluctuation. Next couple of years setting up to be real nice.
Yeah. So if you wanted to try to increase your turkey population, maybe on your own piece of property, what outlook would you look to?
Yeah. So for me, if you look at all the data that's being published out there, some of our studies, we finished up a study that looked at, like, we followed brood, like these poults, for the first 14 to 28 days of their life, seeing what exactly they used. I'm not saying, like, oh, they used oaks. No. Like, what were they using? How much bugs did it have? What was the temperature where it was? Like, these things that actually, are going to affect a small animal that can't thermoregulate, that needs a lot of protein. Bottom line is, you need some shady areas in the summer because they don't thermoregulate well. So
it's hot here.
Well, they'll overheat. So they need some shady areas, some cooler areas. And otherwise, you need early successional habitat, herbaceous cover, things that they can climb out under. Like, at the simplest one, that's just like an oak stand with, like, poison ivy growing over, right? Yeah. But at a better, it's grasshopper habitat. So it's early successional habitat with ragweed, partridge pea, all these things that are going to be eaten really well by grasshoppers and that they can run through. So when I talk about, hey, let's make turkey habitat, what I really say is, let's make quail habitat. You make quail habitat nowadays, you're making turkey habitat because it's just a turkey poult. That's really all that's driving the system. Yeah.
I didn't realize they were that small.
They're tiny.
So do they just hang out in the nest for the first little bit, or they pretty much hit the ground running?
So they'll they'll hatch, and she'll, like, kind of gather them up. So they'll hatch, they'll hang out for a couple hours at the nest, and then they basically would do what's I consider the gauntlet. So what she's going to do, she's going to take them from nesting habitat to brooding habitat. And the key here is what we've seen on our studies. So we published a paper that showed that during that gauntlet, where she's taking them over the day or two to brooding habitat, that's a make it or break it moment for that brood, because it's just like, when you see the little sea turtles going to the beach, like, this is the moment when they're exposed to predation, and, like, the closer that brood habitat is, the better. And so it's not just creating brood habitat, but the scale at which we create it. So I want it to be spotty all over the property. I don't want it to be just like, let's put 5 acres here and call it a day. No, I want 1 acre here, 1 acre here, 1 acre here. That way I can make that gauntlet a little shorter, make it a little easier, make them have to travel less overall. You see where I'm going with that? Because she ain't going to spend the whole time that brood's there, even if you had a 20-acre patch of perfect habitat.
She ain't going to spend the whole...
No, she's going to walk them around and go to the next one. Like, it's just kind of like, you can only exploit an area so much. And so I want them to be able to kind of keep that tight and just go around in circles.
Yeah. There's and I'm sure you've already talked about it, but what was a little bit, just, I know we talked about this before, we'll probably get in detail later, but what was a little bit of the reason for changing the limits of the turkey?
All right. So Okay. That's a big answer. You want me to go through it all?
We got the time if you got the
All right,
words.
man. Listen, all right. So when we worked with TWRA, what TWRA now has is called an adaptive harvest management program. Beforehand, it would be like, all right, let's look at the data, look at the population trends, show them the commissioners. What do you think? All right, well, our recommendation is to do this. All right, and then we go to commissioners. What adaptive harvest management does is it takes very clear stated objectives, and it's data driven. So it says how, based on these data trends and how we feel like these data trends address our objectives, here's the outcome here's what we should do. Mm-hmm. So TWRA values maximizing harvest opportunity. Like we want you to go out, and if you want to harvest whatever, as long as it doesn't negatively affect the population in a meaningful way, we want you to do it.
Right.
All right. And so in turkeys in particular, what we see is what kills turkeys is most turkeys are going to die in the first 2 weekends. It's actually just the number of weekends we give you is going to drive turkey harvest. So most of the turkeys are going to be killed in the first 3 weekends, and then after that, people stop hunting. And most people are going to kill one bird. Some will kill 2, almost none kill 3. But some, a couple do, but not at a meaningful level. Like, in other words, like, the way to think about this is you got to think of it at a population level. We all know people that kill 3 birds, right? Yeah. If they, legally. And so, but most people don't. A lot of people shoot 0 birds. And so at a population level, when we were like, okay, well, how should the harvest regulations be? Well, when we looked at all this science and did all this modeling, I'm talking like we are the envy right now. Tennessee is the envy of the southeastern state agencies and how we're doing science to inform management. I don't think people realize that.
That's good.
No, we are at the
pinnacle.
We're at the apex, and I think it really it speaks a lot about what TWRA is doing.
For sure.
But it shows very clearly that like the harvest differences between a season setting regulation of 2 birds per season or 3 birds per season is almost none. Like, it doesn't matter. Right. Just not enough people kill 3 birds. Yeah. So we did recommend that. We recommended 3 birds to the commission. Now, here's where the political process comes in, and the commissioners are listening to their stakeholders, their constituents. They're like scared crapless, like, oh my God, 3 birds when the turkey population is declining. And we're like, no, we're looking at the data, and the poult per hen ratio is going in the right direction. We feel like, but the commission's like, let's just take it, one day at a time, and we'll go back we'll keep it as what it was. Yeah. And then you talk about the season setting regulation for like something like, when should we have the season? Mm-hmm. When should it start?
That was a big question. I was kind of curious why they pushed it back like that.
I personally liked it.
Well,
at first I was like, but I like it.
Well, so TWRA had a study going on with turkeys before I got here that was with the University of Tennessee, and what they found was after several years of studies, they found that their data suggested that season-setting regulations didn't really change any turkey productivity indices, didn't change nesting, success, poult, recruitment.
Yeah.
All right, so then if I'm going to use that data to inform TWRA's adaptive harvest management program, what that tells me is like then season setting, the time that we actually structure seasons for when they should start, is a social decision. When are people most happy with it? And what people kept coming back in the comments to TWRA was not so much about like a lot of people liked an earlier start, a lot of people liked a later start, but those people that had kids that had the youth season liked the later start because they found that it was better conditions to bring their kids hunting.
Right.
And so, okay, if you got some people that are for it and some people that are against it, but hey, it benefits the kids to actually have it later.
Yeah.
That's how you could get a later season.
I would never have guessed that's why that's pushed it back.
That's it.
It makes sense.
I mean, the original idea was it would have an effect on population, reproductive parameters.
Yeah.
But the data that was produced suggested not, and there's still a lot of ongoing studies, some of which show that there could be an effect. Just we go off of the data that TWRA pays for.
What does the timeline look like from, let's say, opening day of season to when the hens actually start sitting? Mm-hmm. Because, I mean, later in the season, it seems easier to get on a bird during the middle of the day.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Yeah, so the way all right, I'll go ecological on you. Why not? But what the way birds that are kind of, you got to keep in mind what is gobbling. It's just signaling to a mate, like, hey, I'm over here. Hey, come look at me, right? Because the hens are supposed to go to the males. Theoretically, males aren't supposed to go to the hens. So hey, I'm gobbling. I'm over here. Come look at me. And they'll gobble out against each other too. I'm competing with that male over there, that male over there.
Right.
And they have pulsatile testosterone, which means like one day the entire population is like ramped up on testosterone. They're all going to be gobbling their heads off. The next day, they've spent all their testosterone. They'll be quiet. So like if you ever gone to the same place and been like, dude, they were on fire yesterday. It's quiet today.
Dude, I've done that a bunch.
So it's that. So like, okay. All right. But as time goes on, there's a change in basically the competition. In other words, more hens are starting to incubate. Less hens are receptive. If all else is equal, those males are getting more and more pissed off that they can't get any hen to come to them. Like, where are they? And so they're going to strike up a lot better later on in the season just because they're getting more and more frustrated that they're still ready to breed, but there's less to breed. Yeah. And in general, most seasons set in the southeast are timed so that they're occurring during that peak in incubation. In other words, like right, the second week of the season should be when they're peaking and incubating, and then that's why.
Well, that makes perfect sense. Off the turkeys and onto what's current now, the deer numbers. Mm-hmm. Of course, we had a big change in as far as the laws and regulations this year, but are they growing?
No, I don't think they're growing. I think if you look at, so we put what's called an integrated population model together for TWRA. That's basically using all of the data that TWRA has to give the best estimates of deer populations that we can guess. It's hard to guess. What's 1.5? If I told you there's 1.5 million deer in Tennessee, you'd probably say okay. And if I said you there's 1 million, you'd say okay. It doesn't really matter. But like over time, if we look at the trends, once coyotes came in, there was a decline in deer populations, and then what we've seen is basically a stabilization, more or less. In some areas maybe a little tick up, but all in all, it's just a stable population. Has been that way more or less for 10 years.
And that's a good thing, right?
I think that's a great thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a great thing. And, it also suggests that there's, when we were making those regulations, right, we became much more liberal in our deer harvest framework this year than previous years. And the main thing is, like, it's such a localized process. Some people need that freedom to actually go harvest more deer because they have too many deer.
Right.
And if you think you don't have enough deer, guess what? You don't have to, don't pull the trigger. Yeah. It's that simple. And it goes back to how much can regulations affect deer populations at all? Most people only kill one deer a year. That's it. That's what the stats say. Like, you get your one for the freezer and you're good.
You're good to go.
And so it's like, I either, if it was declining, what we would have to go to is something like a quota system for all of our animals. That's the only way to effectively really reduce harvest, right? Like, clench down that spigot so hard that we really actually are changing how much water is coming out. And it might be quota, it might be one bird bag limits, it might be whatever, but it might not be what a lot of people want. Does that make sense? So stable populations are real nice. Yeah. Yeah.
So for the 3 does a day, is that because people wasn't killing enough deer or CWD or?
No, it's because people don't kill, not enough deer. I mean, it's not a matter of killing enough deer. It's that we could have changed it from 3. Most people said they wanted options within their current packages that TWRA offered before last year. Mm-hmm. They liked the package offerings, like anything from as liberal as 3 does a day to like, I can't remember, constricted to 1 a season, let's say. So we used the current frameworks that they already had. And what we find is like, because most people only kill 1 doe a year anyway, you could have 3 a day. You can have 10 a day. It doesn't really matter because you're probably going to wind up with the same amount of doe harvest regardless. And that's basically what it causes it.
So it seems like a lot more of this is political, more as far as changing the seasons, than it would be actual science-based?
No, I think it's actually the exact opposite. I think politically a lot of people would say, well, I'm scared that...
Yeah, they want to pull back their reins even more.
What do you mean? What do you mean we're going to go to kill 3 does a day? That means somebody can kill, I'm doing the math, 180 does a year. And we're like, no, the science says they're going to kill 1.
Yeah, I was fixing to say, I don't know of a single person that's killed any more deer this year than they have in years past.
Well, and the nice thing about the process that we created is it's reiterative. So we're gonna go out, we're gonna collect all the data this season. It's coming in, and once we find out what happened, the model itself, this internal adaptive harvest management model,
could change.
It'll make new recommendations based on what it learns. It's constantly learning. You can think of it as AI for wildlife, right? And so it's constantly learning and predicting. And so if things went haywire, which they're not going to, but if they were, it would learn and be like, okay, and we're only going to get better from here. That's the good news.
Do y'all ever put GPS trackers on deer?
I have in the past when I was part of the University of Georgia Deer Lab. I worked with a lot of colleagues that did. While I've been here, I haven't. Yeah. We did some cool, I love hunting. I live for hunting. So all right, we had all these big bucks that we were putting GPS collars on. I wanted to know all right, which location would I have had to sit to have the most likely chance to harvest these big bucks? Things like that.
I'd be curious to know as far as what a home range pre-rut and a home range during the rut looks like.
I just wonder if big deer in general or the bigger bucks in general, you would have to think that each one is different, or they all kind of harbor the same patterns as far as instinctual.
There was a really good study by Aaron Foley. It came out of Texas A&M, and basically he looked at all these different GPS patterns from a bunch of different male bucks pre-rut, and what he basically was there's 3 different types of bucks. There's these solitary bucks, and they basically keep a tight home range the whole time. They're focused in on an area. There's your more normal bucks that are going to kind of cruise in a bigger range, and their home range is going to expand during the rut. And then you have these wanderers, and they're just kind of going, and they're just kind of cruising all over the place. They tend to be a little younger and just go. And so, in the end of all things, there's probably not a normal buck, but what most people say is okay, I had a new buck show up, or hey, the buck I was hunting disappeared. My neighbor must have killed it. What we do know is that there's these really large changes in where bucks hang out.
Sure.
Pre-rut and rut. And if you're on top of them in September, they're not going to use that area come November. Yeah. They're going to push into where the does are, and the does are pushing to where they want to be, which is somewhere different than they were in even September. So you're basically not going to have about 60 to 70% of the bucks that were on your property won't be there come the rut, regardless of what strategy they are.
Yeah. No. That's always been a curious question of mine, because you always, like you said, have a wanderer, or your deer goes missing or whatever, but do you see what is a normal buck's daily range? And we've heard anything. This is a conversation that especially has been lately because of some poaching, but 10 miles, can a deer do that in a day, or is that not close?
No, it's not even close. A buck will show up a couple miles away from where it's been. Yes, a buck will chase a doe a couple miles, but there's 10 miles would be insane. Yeah. Most of their ranges are going to be during the rut, a couple hundred acres to maybe top out at 1,000 acres. Yeah. That would be max. And that would be across the entire season. So in a day, he might walk 3 miles total, but he's circling the same couple areas. You know what I'm saying? So is there a chance everybody's had that deer they've been watching that somebody shot 7 miles down the road, and you're where did that? That happens. But
it's not likely.
We had
it's the rarity. It's the rarity and not the common. Really, they're just switching over, a mile or two to where they're going to be. Yeah,
that's what it was. We had a deer that we watched, and he got hit 4.2 miles from where my dad's house is. But it was during that trend. He staged up at his house during the summer, August-ish. Yeah, and then he moved into his normal wherever he's chasing his ladies at later on. But I was still pretty impressed. It was, like I said, a little over 4 miles. But
it's weird to me too, because it's almost like a light switch when that velvet comes off, that they do different things.
Well, you got to think about what's actually driving that velvet coming off, right? So basically, you got something. Antlers are amazing, right? They're the quickest growing tissue that we know of. It's developing bone. And then it's basically this testosterone.
That is wild.
You think about it. When we were at the University of Georgia, we had a researcher that came down to study using antlers as kind of this for cancer. Like because it grows so rapidly, you can use it as a study system for cancer. Anyway, so like, okay, so then it'll keep growing until testosterone tells it it's time to harden. And that's being driven by like sun level, how much sunlight there is and timing and all that. But at some point it says, okay, time to harden. Okay, well then if you just think about that, well then the antlers are they're rubbing off their velvet at the time they're ready to go. Like they're ready to go. So the second their velvet is off, they're gearing up.
Yeah.
Their testosterone is freaking
So their whole
high.
body's changing
Their
essentially.
body, they're ready. Like they're physiologically ready to breed. They're good to go. Like the only thing that they're waiting on is
The does.
And like they might be in the beginning part of it a little bit more focused on packing in the pounds just for winter, but like their mind is when we used to put like 1 or 2 bucks into our deer pens at the University of Georgia, we could have breeding happen the second they harden those antlers if we wanted to.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Me either. And it makes sense that they're waiting on the does, and it takes the does a little longer to come in. Do you ever see anything as far as like antler growth? Is that pretty well all genetic?
Yeah. So, all right. That's another kind of. There's a couple things. Antler growth is definitely inherited. It's inheritable. But what drives antler growth the most is the quality of the habitat where the deer is. So,
that makes sense as well because
I was just like, if a deer don't have it in him, like if he don't have those genetics, like he's never going to be.
Sure. You can think about it. It's like, it's the scaffolding of a building, but the actual building itself is, what type of quality ingredients are we pumping in there, right?
Yeah.
And so, I'm not going to make a 2-story house into a mansion, but, hey, I can make it a really nice small house if I want to.
Yeah.
And the underlying it is, the bottom line is if you understand this, does their nutrition drives what that buck is having in utero, which has effects over its lifetime. That buck, the second it's born, needs to gain as much weight as possible to start thinking about actually adding antlers. So, like a button head versus a tiny little spike, right? And they don't express their full actual potential. Like they don't even get close to their potential till 3.5 years old.
Really?
Yes. So like an 8-pointer or 2.5 doesn't mean that it's an 8-pointer for life. It barely means at 3.5 that's an 8-pointer for life. But like you got to at least get them go 3.5 to 4.5 years old. 3.5 they express about 90%, 4.5 95%, 5.5 100% of their potential. But they'll never ever get close to that potential if you don't have the good habitat. And it's all about providing quality food, especially in winter and especially at peak summer around here, like July, August, September, when stuff is really dry. People just think that they need to put a couple food plots out to kill one, and that's enough. But no, you want big bucks. Big bucks start actually by adding food during the springtime and summer, and then they go from there.
And then that food source, would that be like a high protein food source or?
No, protein isn't really that limiting for bucks. In fact, I would like when I work on properties, I try to explain to people like everyone wants high protein pellets for their food or something like that, and I go, well, the way they add protein, for what it's worth, is they do 2 different ways. But proteins is generally unpalatable for deer. They don't like the taste of protein, so they'll eat less of it. The more protein you add into a feed, the less they'll eat it. And then also a lot of places add gossypol, which is like a cotton byproduct. It's cotton seed to increase their protein levels. That's really bad for deer. Deer will lose weight eating cottonseed, even though they love it. It's like they'll eat it. They'll do it against their own greater good. Yeah. All right. So then what they're really limited on is energy. So you just need to think about it like they are rutting, they are depleting their fat, they are depleting their muscle mass, and they got to make it through about March into April to start packing on the weight, really.
Right.
And so when you think of it that way, well, then it's all energy. We wanted them to use all their fat that they can. We want to pack them full of fat so they don't deplete their muscle mass, so that when it comes April, they don't have to spend much time regaining anything. They can just worry about packing on mass on their antlers instead. So energy drives the system, not protein.
Really? That's contrary to popular belief.
Well, I think it's
a market. It's probably a marketing thing in the industry.
Well, you got to understand, and this is something I've learned from just doing science, and I don't know, maybe I'm a little jaded, but all hunting stuff is geared to people. Yeah. Like all the products. Like Antler Max, this and that. It's like, protein powder. It's like, Yeah, they're just putting nice fancy words to sell it to you. They got to sell it to you, not the deer. You're not doing anything for that deer.
Yeah. So what would you say if you had to guess as far as without naming a brand, like what would you put out to promote growth besides planting food plots or something like that?
So there is no like commercial version of a pelleted feed that I would recommend for anybody. There's, there are some companies that are better than others for pelleted feed. A lot of places you can actually like go to random places and get their own version of pelleted feed that they make for livestock, and some of that's probably better for deer than honestly what's in those bags. Only thing you need that's super easy and super cheap besides a food plot is every once in a while put out a salt block. Deer are salt deficient, and females especially during lactation.
That's all I put out.
Yeah. If I want to make a big difference, like if I want to like really pack on the muscle and pack on the antler size of a deer, and I want you give me an unlimited budget, I'm putting out supplemental feed. During the winter, I can probably just switch that to even like just straight corn or something that's super energetic and just going to fatten them up. But like that, even in Texas, studies have shown that that's like all that money that is adding maybe 10%
to their horns.
10% total. Even then, 80+% of their food is coming from natural vegetation, because you got to think about it. It's just like if all we ate was white bread. That would mess up our gut pretty hardcore. You know what I'm saying? So they're going to eat that natural veg just to have a decent functioning stomach. You know what I'm saying? So it's all habitat first. And then, so I'd rather my landowner say, if I got a $20,000 budget for supplemental food, I'd rather you spend that $20,000 changing some habitat. We'll get much better results.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So like planting stuff.
Yeah, planting food plots, like you can think about anything from like, summer food plots, anything from as simple as buckwheat to as fancy as, okay, we'll go soybeans and some other stuff. Or in the winter, we can go real crazy. But having that property and burning that property, disking different areas, doing just basic habitat management work is going to pay off just as much as having food plots. If I have food plots, I want to do at least like 7 to 10% of the property in food plots. If I want to make a difference, I want to make a difference, and I want to have a spot. Like I want to have a spot on that property that's a big food plot that like I don't even hunt. Deer just know that's their safe spot to just, you can pack on the pounds here. Yeah. And then I'll hunt somewhere else.
So without even feeding or putting out natural food, just increasing their natural forage is huge.
It's bio 101 when we learn that, like I teach in habitat management, I teach like this growth curve on populations, and all it says basically is like deer will keep growing as fat as they can with as many antler points as they can, as heavy, with as many offspring as they can until something is restricted in their environment. It's just basic, that makes sense, right?
Right.
And so all I'm doing is just putting out more of those resources so they're less restricted. And I'm using the bullet to cut down on that population so that they're even more restricted, or less restricted, I should say. And so like, that's it. It's that simple in theory. Doing good habitat management practices is the best way to grow big bucks.
Yeah, that's awesome. What would you say some of the biggest threats to both the deer and turkey habitats are today?
Well, you want to do habitat or you want to do just population?
Let's do population.
Because it's an easier answer on the population. I think chronic wasting disease is a big issue with deer, but I'm going to take a different twist here. Most people talk about, it has population level influences. I think it pits a lot of hunters against state agencies. I think there's a lot of lack of understanding from our constituency about how crucial or how bad this disease is for populations. But really, I worry about day in and day out. It's related to mad cow. So I sit there and wonder, like, what happens the day that like it does jump to a human and we get the first confirmed chronic wasting disease positive person? Then I wonder, like, well, what does that mean for hunting in the future when the most populous game, the most popular game animal, the most widely distributed game animal, the one that's in everyone's suburban backyard right now, all of a sudden carries a terminal disease? And I wonder what that does for how we look at deer, how people perceive deer, how...
It would be huge.
I worry about that. I think, there's never been a confirmed case of chronic wasting disease crossing over. There's
what exactly is CWD.
It's one of the prion diseases. So it's like a protein that's misfolded that acts in their neurological system and basically degrades their brain matter. For lack of that's a very simple way to put it. But it's stable in the environment. It's not like a bacteria or a virus where I have to cough it in your face. Let's say no, you can just shed it on this table, and then if that deer just kind of pushed its face against that table, they can get it, and it stays there forever. It's undegradable. You can't even burn it off. You have to, bleach barely touches it. So
Holy
it
moly.
will be here. It'll be like it's in Tennessee, and it'll be where it's in Tennessee forever. And the question is can I see just the odds game of saying if so many deer eventually have it, if it keeps, it's in a new state every year, if more deer keep getting it, when and if does that happen where we go, ABC News is running their evening headline with, first, deer, zombie deer are now giving a fatal disease to humans. And what does somebody say when, the suburban people or somebody that doesn't have a connection like we do with deer that goes I don't want that deer in my kid's backyard where they're playing on the swing set because you just told me that they just can put chronic wasting disease on a surface and can contract it. And it's 100% true. And so you see where I'm going with that?
Yeah, it's scary.
So that goes in my mind of it's not the population level effects, which are severe and important. I relate to chronic wasting disease as a hunter and go what happens when my favorite animal becomes only a pest species for the majority of the United States, right? Okay, so then turkey populations. Land use changes are severely affecting turkey populations, I believe. What concerns me the most is we are going to a very uniform, neat approach to everything in our lives. I own my property and I have my woods and it's a nice square woods. And then I have my nice square fescue field and, everything, and I don't blame anybody for what looks nice and what they want. But this blockiness, this lack of heterogeneity, everything just looks the same and weeds are frowned upon. And I watch everybody mowing their side of their freaking driveways and not driveways in their house. I'm just talking how many times have we watched people just, okay, it's time to mow my field. Why are you mowing it? Man, I'm telling you, that
has a huge effect.
Yeah, and then you have agriculture that's just becoming more and more efficient. We lost, the loss of the increase in price of corn through ethanol, the loss of a lot of people enrolling in CRP. All of these things have large level landscape effects that are concerning about turkeys. I think that's.
We've talked about regenerative, this new regenerative. Well, it's not new, but this regenerative farming is becoming a huge thing, and that kind of
explain to me what you mean.
It's instead of using pesticides and all that, trying to kill everything, trying to use everything in this healthy balance of instead of just every company just wanting you to spray something I've heard people say all the government wants is for you to just spray it. They just want to kill everything. It's I just think they're this regenerative farming or whatever they're calling it, the carbon cowboys or whatever. I don't know if you've probably seen it on social media, but it's just a way of I don't know. It's just a natural way of doing it.
There's so many different scalars here, but there used to be a time where a farmer wouldn't plant something because it probably wasn't going to make most times. Well, now crop insurance is a way that, I got a pretty good chance of actually making money off that between the crop insurance and the failure. I think the future for turkeys, the future in turkey management and where they're going to benefit is from precision agriculture where I'm taking my tractor and I know my returns to the square foot, let's say, that area right here isn't giving me really good returns. And whenever we get a federal program that says we'll match the returns that you would have got and you don't have to plant it, or we'll give you a little bit more than you would have made, that's where the turkey habitat's going to be. That's the future. But until then, no, it's just there's no grain anymore to pick off the fields because look at it. I mentioned look at it from a turkey poult's view. I go around Cookeville and all I see are fescue fields. That's nothing. that's unusable habitat for the poult for the first week or so of their life. People see turkeys out there all the time, but it's like they're old turkeys at that point.
Yeah.
So like, we're really making we're making it hard on them.
On top of that, and I feel like there's a ton of housing developments. I'm sure that has a big impact.
I think so. I don't know what level, other than it probably pushes animals into, tighter and tighter corridors for predators to hunt. We call them like ditch cougars is what I heard most recently, but like feral cats are definitely like,
dude, those things, cats, dude, people don't give them enough credit for how freaking, dude, those things are, especially like you said, feral cats are freaking, dude, they're nasty.
Yeah, I mean they're killers. I mean they're killers. They're killers. They're straight killers. And so you add it all together, man. And I think it's like, I think. Listen, my stepbrother or my brother lived in Staten Island. Staten Island has awesome turkey population. Like
really,
yeah, crazy turkey population. All right, well that's pretty freaking urban, right? Like they can survive. They can survive in anything. The underlying issue is it comes back to, and they're not hunting turkeys there. So right. I think, if you want to have sustainable harvest, you got to have the habitat. If you want the habitat, it can't be clean, it can't be neat, it can't be nice, it can't be filled with high-graded forests,
be natural.
And fescue fields. Just let some stuff grow rank and let's see what happens.
Yeah.
And I think the future of farming is going to have to kind of integrate less intensive pasture, instead do rotation of cows. More, that's where we're going to have to go to get wildlife to come back, at least upland game birds.
Yeah. So 20 years from now, do you see the habitat staying the same, or do you see maybe it declining unless some of these farming aspects change?
That's a good question. I think that the more we move, how do I put this? You got to make money off your land, man. Yeah. It's just the bottom line. Owning land's expensive, having land's expensive. The more we're going to move towards, I got to make sure I make money off my land, less recreational use, the more we're going to get into a situation where it's just everything becomes farming. And farming in and of itself, I'm not talking about just agricultural like crop farming, just farming in general is we got to do something with a purpose, and we got to do it, make it uniform, and we got to make it easy to grow and easy to harvest. And the second you have that, you lose any type of, I could call it heterogeneity, but any kind of differences in the environment, you're going to lose turkeys. So if we keep that way,
that's tough, man.
You see where I'm going though?
Yeah.
I don't think I don't think it's surprising when you look at what's left of the game animals that we harvest. So there's very few ruffed grouse anymore. Very few quail anymore. What's left are generalists. Turkeys, very generalist. Deer, very generalist. They can make a living in most situations. It's a matter of how good can they make a living. And if you look at like the quality for a turkey lately in the last 20 years,
it's not great.
It's not great. We shouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
We should not be surprised.
And I think we talked to one of your students that said he was studying, what was it?
The
effects of motor vehicles on turkeys.
Oh yeah, and ruffed grouse. So it's a project that's looking at the effects of habitat management and disturbance. So like off highway vehicles,
ATVs, stuff like that,
side by sides, razors, stuff like that. The disturbance in the habitat kind of interaction and how it affects the distribution and abundance of ruffed grouse and turkeys. And that's like a really cool question, because what we're seeing with like our ducks is disturbance drives the system, whether it's hunting disturbance or just lifting them up. Like they don't want to be anywhere near a person. Yeah. And that makes sense, right? Because they're getting their butt shot at. I think it's the same for probably turkeys who are getting shot in the springtime. And
sure.
And I wouldn't be surprised if it's the same for grouse, but when you have an area that's got a lot of roads and a lot of people running through it, well, then you're decreasing suitable habitat down to way
and plus
less.
They don't want to hear that.
Well, if I'm something that makes a living off of like trying to reproduce and I drum and you got to hear me if you're a female so that I'm there, and all of a sudden I'm competing against this really loud highway on the side of it.
Yeah.
You see where I'm going?
Yeah, no, 100%. I'm glad you brung up ducks too, because y'all do a lot with ducks, it seems like.
So some of our big projects right now are working with ducks, and I've been working with Jamie Feddersen at Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency for a long time. He's a waterfowl coordinator for TWRA. And we have a bunch of students. We've had Abby, Blake Bradshaw, Nick Masto, Corey Highway were part of our first part of it. Those were 3 students that were like in phase 1, and then we're in phase 2. And we also have Lydia Holmes and Nate Steelman, and Corey's continued. And that's 6 theoretical degrees. So it's a lot of time, a lot of work, a lot of effort. And we also have a postdoc on it, Nick Baker, who's doing stuff. So that's like a lot of people. And what we're doing is trying to understand waterfowl ecology up and down the flyway by putting on GPS trackers on mallards. CWRA is funding almost all of it. And like, we're trying to key in on like, what is the role of hunters and disturbance and food, and how that affects whether or not people are going to see or harvest ducks, and it shouldn't come as a surprise that like, yeah, they all concentrate on safe areas because it's the only place they don't get shot. And if you disturb those safe areas, they don't like all of a sudden fly somewhere else.
Yeah.
No, they're like, no, I'm just going to come back here, but now you screwed with me, so I'm going to move even less. So when we went in and we like ripped up all those refuges and stuff that people complain all the time, like, I'd shoot my ducks if they weren't on the refuge, get rid of the refuge system. Well, we went in there and we rallied them up. We like spent hours ripping around the WMA or the refuge, I should say, lifting up 100,000 ducks. And we were listening to shotgun blast at the same time that it occurred. And shotgun blast decreased 50% on the days that we disturbed the refuge because ducks moved less on the days we disturbed the refuge. They basically lifted up, waited for us to leave, and then hunkered down for several days. They're like, that wasn't fun. We're not moving. And then food, obviously, flooded corn, all that. We're trying to understand the role of like, they have so much food out there. Why would you move if you think you're going to get shot when you know you can get a belly full of food at nighttime and be okay?
Yeah. What is the like scientific reason for the flyway? Why is it just one area, I guess is where I'm getting at.
So obviously there's 4 different flyways. We have a more linear like path right down the Mississippi Alluvial Flyway. Like there's a historic wintering area, and that's because if you look at what the historic Mississippi Alluvial Valley was, you had flooded water backing up to all this land that was highly productive in the summer. So you have all the seeds, all these acorns, all these things, and water would creep in there in the winter. And so you're basically creating a buffet just as the ducks would be coming down south. So it creates a perfect situation. At the same time, you look at the actual vegetation cover that's there, and it's in some areas it can get real thick, and that's really nice to
they like it.
Yeah. So like it makes sense like why from southern Louisiana all the way to northern Tennessee.
They love it.
It was the perfect type of waterfowl habitat because it was basically spent all summer making groceries, and then the groceries were only available in the winter. So it's perfect.
Yeah. Do you think like that's something that changes over time, the flyways, or is
our data? If you look at the data, the flyways aren't moving. The flyways aren't moving. No ducks are flying more further east, west, whatever. Yeah, they're just becoming more difficult to harvest. Like harvest rates have been declining for the past 20 or 30 years. So in other words, male duck that was, if we look at males 25 years ago, 25% of them were going to be killed. 30% of them are going to be killed. Nowadays, it might be 10%, depending on the year. So, like, they're just harder to kill. And I think that makes sense because there's so much hunting pressure out there. It's so predictable, too. Like, we did surveys that looked at, like, we went around and looked at all these blinds that were being hunted. If you've ever been out to West Tennessee, everyone hunts out of a blind. So we flew over them. And if the mojos were on, we were like, okay, that blind's being hunted. Didn't matter if it was December 5th. Or the last day in January. It didn't matter if it was a Wednesday or Saturday. 80 to 90% of those blinds were occupied and being hunted. And I think that's pretty uniform across the Mississippi Alluvial Valley. Like southern hunters are a big majority of the hunting pressure nowadays. Always have been. But nowadays it's so expensive to do waterfowl hunting. And it's, it's passion and it's like a secondary religion in some cases.
For
right?
sure.
Yes, and so it's like I'm going out there. I'm going out there to kill my ducks because I don't want to miss it. I don't want to miss the one day that could be good too. Well, if you think about it, if you're a duck, if like 80% of the landscape that's suitable for you to interact with is probably hunted at any moment in time, you learn very quickly how not to get shot. Yeah. And I think this in ecology, we talk about consistency is probably the safest bet for an animal. Like as long as something's consistent, doesn't matter if it's high risk or low risk, they'll learn the game. You think of a deer, we put GPS transmitters on deer. Right,
it's consistent either way.
We put them right up against the road. The deer that get hit by cars weren't the ones that sat by the road every day and they crossed the road a bunch of times. They had learned to cross the road. The ones that get hit are the ones that had never crossed the road before. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so it's the same with a duck. Like after the first day of realizing where the hunting pressure is, like I know the game, I'm not going to get killed.
So you think it's like kind of an evolution type thing? Do they pass that on to their offspring, you probably think?
We're interested in that. We've been doing genetic tests, and our preliminary data, we're in the process of getting it published, but our preliminary data suggests that it might be genetic. In other words, genetics affects migration strategies.
Sure.
And so, like, we have different migration strategies, just like we had different brooding behaviors. Mm-hmm. And we have some that like fly quick and fast straight to their wintering area. Well, if you fly quick and fast to your wintering area, you relocate less. You don't have to relearn your environment as much. You deal with one opening day. You receive about half the hunting pressure as something that follows a normal migration pattern, and you're about half as likely to be harvested.
Yeah,
and over time, you might see some differences.
Less likely to die.
Yeah. So maybe it is genetic.
So it seems to me like we're us as hunters,
we're educating them.
Yeah, we're educating them, but at the same time, we do 90% of our harvesting when they're after a female. Would that be correct? Like, we hunt deer during the rut. Most of the deer get killed during the rut. The turkeys
most of them are during mating
are trying to mate.
Yeah. I've always thought about that, especially with turkeys. I wondered, way back when, this isn't my first thought on, like, what type of genetics we're messing with on, like, wouldn't quiet tom, a subtle tom, be more likely to survive? And is that why we don't hear gobbling as much anymore? Like, I've always wondered about those things. It's more likely that, these insidious processes that hunters might be inducing, we're an apex predator. We're going to affect a population. If it's something small over time, it can manifest 20, 30, 40 years down the line as, like, hunting's worse. And certainly if you look at waterfowl hunting, it is getting worse over time. Turkey hunting follows population patterns. Like, good years are 2 years after good hatch years.
Yeah.
It's like predictable. Some of our crappiest waterfowl seasons have happened at the highest populations. You know what I'm saying? So we're starting to see a decoupling of waterfowl populations and hunter success.
Yeah.
Deer, they're predictable as could be. High deer densities, you're going to see a lot of deer killed, and low deer densities less.
So it depends on the species.
It depends on the species.
That's what I was kind of getting at too, and we was talking about the evolution. But, like, at what point do these animals figure out, hey, mating season, hunters?
Man, if you're exerting any type of pressure on the specific part of that kind of distribution,
it could affect it.
You've got to imagine that, what we're trying to do when we're doing regulations is we're trying to distribute that hunting pressure equally on all individuals. Yeah. The second we're not, things can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the science side, and we all know the hunting side. What's one thing you think you could, or hunters in general, could do better to help the conservation of not only the ducks and the deer and the turkeys, but just in general?
All right. I don't know if you'll like this answer. It's not actually, it's partially, I guess they can trust their state agencies a little bit more, to be honest with you. Yeah. If there's a lot of good policy decisions that could be made if there wasn't a very strong vocal group that distrusted the state agency and thought that there was some kind of purposeful neglect going on. A lot of what the state agency is doing.
I've always wondered why, like, maybe it's just a social media thing, like we talked about, that people just like to complain no matter. It ain't going to please everybody, but I mean, I personally, what...
Well, there's a confirmation bias. People go, okay, well, what I'm experiencing is clearly the truth, and what you're experiencing is, like, nowhere near the truth. There's a reason, like, and it's hard to decouple that the processes that are actually going on that affect what we're managing for occur outside of your one individual experience that you share the way life is happening. But, like, I've watched a lot of things that would be really good for the resource not occur because politically it might
too much outside noise,
because a couple or a large group of people are somehow thinking there's something nefarious going on. And it's like, it couldn't be any further from the truth. I've never met somebody in the state agency that I wouldn't say is doing it for the wrong reasons. They're all doing it we all got into it for the same thing. They're hunters, they're fishermen, they love the outdoors, they love them more than anybody. I mean, they did it for a living. Okay. And
it's a passion.
It is a passion. To think that somehow the hunter on a forum is somehow more passionate than the person doing it for a living is crazy. And that we wouldn't want this exact same thing they want. We just understand the process to get there a little bit better. And it might not see as crystal clear. And, it's obviously the gap of information and science to information to policy needs to be clear to everybody. But yeah, that's a weird way of saying that's the thing you could do. You want to make a big difference? Trust what's going on. Trust the process. The other thing is, always advocate on behalf of the resource and move, push when possible to working with NRCS and other local agencies that are going to give you some good habitat management clues.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. And you struck a great point there is the passion. I don't know of a single TWRA agent or anybody that works in the agency that wouldn't be there if they didn't like the outdoors. It just don't make sense.
You're not doing it for the pay.
Yeah.
You're not doing it for the great simple hours. I mean, they work their butt off.
Yeah.
You're doing it because you love the resource. That's what got you into it for the first part. There's a lot of sacrifices that you take to get into a field like this. We make a lot of people that have wildlife degrees. It's a very competitive.
You got to go to school for a long time. I mean, there's a lot of.
Yeah, even all the people that you see have at least 4-year degrees, and most of them have a master's degree on top of that. So it's 6 years. And you're making sacrifices. You're not going to be able to live where you want to live. You're just, and then you watch people act like, these people don't have the people on the internet or just in the world think like the people that are managing it don't have a clue. It's like it couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah, we talked about that the other day, how big of effect that just had on hunting in general and
social media.
Yeah.
Whether it was a good or a bad thing, and that's a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
I mean, well, I talk about it all the time when we're talking about ducks and what has technology done to duck hunting, and a mud motor and Onyx has basically fundamentally changed. Just like a side-by-side I did and Onyx has probably changed a lot too, of access is unlimited now. Every single spot that you could possibly hunt. You can put a game plan on how to get there. There ain't many places nowadays where there's, it's just a critter being a critter.
I mean, and if you take a different angle of looking at it, it's like, I mean, is that really... I mean, it's a good thing, if you get out there and got lost or something, but I mean, does that affect your, boots on the ground woodsmanship? And I think it does.
Well, we talk about this a lot, but, all new technology are tools that, if used the correct and proper way, can help you. But a lot of times what you see nowadays is they're not used the correct way.
Give me, some examples. What are you thinking?
Trail cameras would be, we talk about this one all the time.
Okay.
How many times people go
It's
out.
a love-hate thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes I wish I could just pack all mine up and throw them away.
So,
trail cameras can dictate for a lot of people whether they go hunting or not. When really you're looking at 25 feet, you don't know if a deer's coming through there or not. Good inventory tool. Onyx can help you to get back in the right places, but can also, when to push your limits as far as property lines.
Right.
So
100%.
Good tools, bad tools, if used the right way.
100%. There's that. It's the ethical questions. How much of a good thing is a good thing. I think a lot about it on the other side of you talk about helping, in woodsmanship and stuff like that. I might be more of a minimalist when at least I try to be, because I got in it because I love to hunt. I want to figure out this animal, man. I don't want technology to do my job for me.
Yeah.
I want that, I only bow hunt, and I'm I want to get that animal close. I want to get it tight. I'm not throwing shade at anyone else that wants to do it some other way, but to me, I don't want technology to do it for me.
Yeah.
Amen.
Absolutely.
And I think most hunters, most wildlife people that work in the industry, a lot of hunters hunt because they have a passion and like they care about the species that they're chasing. I think the majority of them have good intentions and like, are ethical.
Yeah.
Oh, I do
It's
too.
just like,
It's always a keeping up with the Joneses thing though, or what is my neighbor? What is my neighbor doing? I think if technology has done anything, social media, what I think it's the biggest problem that it has done besides burn spots completely is it's that that neighbor, what is my neighbor doing question, and I think that influences you because it's like well, should we allow baiting? Well, my neighbors, I don't want to bait, but I bet you my neighbor's baiting, and it's the same thing here. Like, man, they're doing this to kill bucks, or they're doing this to kill, ducks. I better do it or I'm going to miss the ship. Yeah. Well, that's how you create an entire landscape that is going to have reverberations for, the hunting culture and probably the population.
Yeah, absolutely. One more thing I wanted to bring up that you mentioned earlier is your own camo patterns.
Yeah.
What do you do different that you don't see on the market?
I mean, it's multifaceted, but if you think about what an animal can see it, and the best way to think about it is a deer has like 80-20 vision. Duck does. A duck and turkey are somehow even worse. They're even more.
Really?
Yeah. And you got to think about it, why that makes sense. So most animals' eyes don't work the same way ours does. Ours works on basically putting a shape together and breaking the patterns apart so that we want to identify an object.
Right.
And like, in other words, like the biggest thing for people is like looking at each other's eyes. That's like what we've evolved to do. So we want to see your face, but I want to pick apart and look into those eyes, right? So that's a real thing. For a deer, they don't give a shit about looking into each other's eyes. They just want to see the predator, right? Yeah. And so, like, why would I want to discern the different shapes of a bobcat when I can just kind of merge it into one brown shape that would stick out really well as a silhouette against the background, right? Like, I don't need to see the shapes if I can get the whole silhouette out and see movement easier. And so, like, all animals are made to, their vision is basically poorer quality because it blends all those details together and pushes out a silhouette more. So like when I look at all the camo patterns, I see camo patterns that are made for human eyes that look, really well camouflaged for a human. And what we would think of as like, well,
good for marketing.
I wouldn't be able to tell that was me. Wow. Yeah. And so like mine are just, my colors are different. The sizes of my blotches are different. The repetitiveness, the scale of it is different. So that like, we did a study that basically showed how fast deer can actually, this is a longer story, but I'll keep it short and sweet, but they perceive movement differently than us. They refresh their eyes more often, and so they can pick up on movement quicker and react quicker. That's why, like, you're shooting a bow and like they drop down, okay, they can react faster. So like my repetitiveness on my camo patterns based on that number, so that like they can't see my movement as much, things like that.
Yeah. Makes sense.
That was interesting to me when you said that, so I had to bring it back up.
Man. Yeah.
Have you ever heard of the website Camo Matrix?
Yeah, he I think they emailed me a long time ago.
Is that
No, I don't know for sure.
Is it like close to what it would be like?
I've never seen a good representation digitally of what a deer's eyesight actually looks like.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you saying that pretty much tells me that these camo companies are making camo for us.
Yeah. Well, 100%. Yeah. I mean, at this
because I've always thought it was kind of gimmicky.
Well, I think if I think if the only thing that we know is that deer. The only thing I would say is on all things, deer see blue really well. Most grays are filled with blue dye because we don't see blue well, and so they want to pop that gray out. Make it look more luminous to you. So like a camo company will use a blue background signature on a gray. And that would give you you would glow, quote unquote, for lack of a better word, at sunrise and sunset, because that's when there's the most blues in the environment. So I make sure I never use anything with a lot of gray in it.
Wow. And we got gray right there.
Yeah. Well, Sitka, I mean, their whole
really gray
thing is gray.
I know, and they just released a pattern working with my colleagues. So maybe it's different. I don't really know.
It is. It's a lot darker.
It's got some more green in it.
It's got a lot more green in it.
I will say, yeah, it has more green in it. I wouldn't, mine doesn't have. I'm looking at this. Mine doesn't have a lot of greens. Like I blend colors together in a way that it's so weird to say, but you got to keep in mind that deer only see yellows /greens and blues. Like they don't see any other colors. And so like
it's so hard for me to fathom.
You can't. That's why I'm saying like when you go to a website that says like look at the way camo patterns look like
through a deer's
you would
vision.
actually there's like only like 5 people in the whole world, 10 people in the whole world that actually understand animal vision in a way that would be like this is what it truly looks like. So if they don't work with them, they wouldn't understand. But like you would have to like kind of squint your eyes and blur out everything, and then understand that like everything that is red and orange is like kind of grayish. Everything that's bright yellow is a dull greenish color. You see where I'm going with that? And all of a sudden, it's not just like what the pattern is, but like what those colors look like, because they start to blend into each other because they're the exact same color. Yeah. So like any time I see green, a deer can't pick up on a subtlety of this green versus that green. That's the same green color to them. We can see about a million
shades.
They can see a million different. We can see a million more shades that they can. And
that's so loud.
So now all of a sudden you got the repetitive patterns that are small, that are similar colors, and you might as well just not even show up. Yeah. I mean, it shows how little, maybe camo doesn't matter all that much versus movement. Yeah.
What about just like solids?
I listen, the old just don't wear blue and you'll be fine. Like just sit still. I think, some old flannels probably killed more deer. Oh yeah, back in the day than any of the new camo patterns.
The old red and black flannels.
Yeah.
I mean, I just wonder if like Brad said, like if you had a guy, because he said there's only probably like a handful of people that actually understood it, like really good. If those camo companies worked with them, like would people actually kill more deer or not?
Well, somebody once, one of the big camo companies once came to me and were like, we'd love for you to design a camo. And I was like, all right, here's what mine looks like. And they're like, oh, that'll never sell. Like that looks ridiculous. They're like, we also have to keep in mind marketing and like what people want, and it's like that'll never sell.
Well, there's a camo company called WTF Camo. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but that's what it's called, WTF Camo. Dude, it looks ridiculous to me as a human. It may, you need to let him show you. But it may be great.
No, I don't love that. I don't hate it though.
It is. We see it in person. We're like, in WTF. I mean,
that's just as good, if not better, than anything else that's out there.
Yeah,
but like the end all be all is I think we often discount, and this goes back to what habitat is and everything else. We discount what it's like to be an animal. We try and anthropomorphize everything. We try and dictate how we feel about something, and that's how an animal actually interacts with it. If we actually started to think about how an animal that's literally it's a prey animal, it's the exact opposite of us. The only thing that matches our eyesight, our senses on eyesight, for example, are hawks. Mm-hmm. The only thing that matches our, but on the other hand, we have terrible smell, right? And it's all, we're made to be predators. Yeah. Predators with eyesight in particular. And so when you start to think about what it means to be a prey species who literally your only job is to detect movement, because anything that's further than 5 feet away from you doesn't matter. Yeah. Right? Because they gotta get close. Well, then we should think about, I remember somebody told me I didn't know anything about turkeys. I never killed a turkey because I was like, turkeys are pretty shitty eyesight. They're like, have you ever hunted? You gotta stay still with the, full camo. And I'm like, well, the reason you guys stay still is because they take that vision of what your camo pattern and merge it into one big blob. And that blob is really easy to detect when it's moving, versus if you actually had camo that they really was based on their eyesight, it would be harder for them to see you.
Yeah. That makes sense.
We need some of that camo.
Yeah. I'd like to see a picture of it for sure.
Yeah, man.
But
If everybody or somebody wants to go check out what all y'all do, where can they find you?
So it's Cohen Wildlife Lab, Cohen Wildlife Lab, and that's on Instagram or Facebook. We post all of our research stuff going on there, and happy to interact with anyone that has any questions. Yeah.
We appreciate you coming on, man. I've learned so much, and we'll get together again.
Happy to. You're literally a 5-10 minute walk down the road. So whenever you guys want to talk, I'm happy to.
No, podcasts like these are the ones I love, because you walk away knowing twice as much as you walked in. So, but yeah, for sure, we appreciate you coming on, and guys, we'll catch you on the next one.